Hi, I'm Congressman Rob Bishop. I represent the 1st Congressional District in Utah. Utah, like many western states, is a public land state, over 60% of which is controlled by the federal government. So in addition to representing Utahns, I also have the privilege of chairing the House Resource Subcommittee on Public Lands. I'd like you to take a look at the first map. Everything that's red on that map is controlled by the federal government. Today, 1 out of every 3 acres in the United States is controlled by the federal government. And in the West, it's 1 out of every 2 acres. That's 660 million acres of federal land in the United States. Those of us here in Congress from the West have to work to educate our colleagues from the East about what it means to be a public land state. For example, what many don't realize is that public lands have a huge impact on education funding. If you look at this next map, every state that is red on that map is a state that has the hardest time funding its education system. You'll see there's a direct correlation between public lands and the ability to grow their education funding. In the West, education funding has grown in the 40% range, while in the East, it's as high as 115%. State of Maine, it's 120%, 127% growth. So to help address this problem, I've introduced legislation known as the Apple Act. Regardless of whether a child lives in public land states or they deserve to have the same access to education as students in the eastern states. Public lands were never supposed to be a hindrance to the economic vitality of states. In fact, when western states were created, the lands were set aside to bring additional economic support. However, an overzealous federal government and deep-pocketed special interest groups have changed this dynamic. Now, many western states and communities that are surrounded by federal lands are finding it harder than ever to rely on public lands for economic support. This current administration and their aggressive anti-multiple-use policies certainly aren't helping things either. Public lands with abundant natural resources sit untapped, while permits and applications to develop these areas simply collect dust. I found that so many in Washington who are bureaucrats either don't realize or simply don't care that unless public lands are available for multiple use, they offer virtually no economic benefit to the community, and they ultimately become more of a burden. I, along with many of my colleagues, are working to get Secretary Salazar and the BLM officials to ensure that our public lands remain open and accessible for grazing, recreation, mineral development, and energy production. It's been a challenge over the past few years, but nonetheless, we are trying to work together to protect the livelihoods of those who depend upon access to the land. Like, I can appreciate some of the special interest groups, their actions are well-intended, at least in their eyes they are. But in reality, it's that stewardship of our resources and multiple use and access that are not mutually exclusive. The fight we face today is not new. They have gotten more aggressive on many fronts, but for the most part, these are the issues we have been fighting for a long time, and in many instances for multiple generations. The bottom line is that virtually everyone cares about education of our kids, who I think we can agree should not bear the brunt of special interest groups' agendas and new federal mandates. We're going to continue to find ways in which we can work together, and while it's not always easy, it is a priority. I wish you all the best in this holiday season. Take care.